Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are stepping right into the middle of a literal digital firestorm. We're going to deconstruct a highly polarized, completely viral political interview that basically took the internet by storm recently. Now, if you've been following modern political discourse, you know things can get kind of heated, right? But the source material we're looking at today, it features these incredibly thick layers of rhetorical friction and just raw emotion. My goal here isn't to tell you who was right or wrong. Absolutely not. Instead, we're going to break down exactly what happened, how the arguments were structured, and why this clash resonated so deeply with audiences all across the political spectrum. To make sense of this chaotic shouting match, we're going to organize our analysis into 6 digestible pieces. We'll start with the anatomy of a viral clash, then look at the public opinion court, culture wars and drag shows, the campaign finance dispute, the identity politics paradox, and finally, wrap it up with the state of debate. Let's dive right in. Section 1, Anatomy of a Viral Clash, setting the stage for the debate. Okay, so we're looking at a really volatile interview between left-wing host David Pakman and right-wing guest Royce White, and we're examining this through the analytical lens of the YouTube channel Justin Reloaded. Right out of the gate, the commentator frames the encounter as a total defeat for the host. I mean, look at this quote. It perfectly captures the intense ideological battle lines here. This isn't presented as some polite disagreement. It's literally framed as a psychological and intellectual demolition. So, to really understand the commentator's specific breakdown of the interview, let's look at these core assertions. Justin Reloaded claims that Pakman essentially panicked when he was cornered, which eventually led him to rage quit the broadcast. The channel argues that Pakman actively dodged uncomfortable questions regarding culture, specifically around drag shows, and instead used a defensive mechanism, basically pivoting to personal attacks regarding White's campaign funds. And on top of that, the commentator adds this meta layer, suggesting the underlying reason for Pakman's alleged dodging is that opposing kids at drag shows immediately earns you the label of bigot in today's cultural climate. Moving on to Section 2, the public opinion court, presumption of innocence and the #MeToo movement. Now, here's where we dig into the first substantive clash of the interview, which centers heavily around what it actually means to be presumed innocent in modern society. It really illustrates the massive disconnect at the heart of their argument. So David Pakman, he anchors his argument in a strict legal framework, right? To him, the presumption of innocence is a standard that applies during police investigations and within a literal court of law. Royce White, on the other hand, completely rejects that narrow definition. He argues from a cultural standpoint, insisting that the presumption of innocence is being actively destroyed in the court of public opinion. And he claims that this public court is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than a legal courtroom.
To really drive this home, White brings up high-profile examples, like Johnny Depp, but his primary concern is actually for the average citizen. White argues that, sure, a wealthy celebrity can survive public accusations and a damaged reputation because, well, they have millions of dollars. But everyday random people who are falsely accused are losing their 9-to-5 jobs with zero due process. They just don't have the resources to hire top-tier lawyers or rally massive social media campaigns in their defense. It's a super compelling argument about societal mechanics, but then the interview takes a massive detour. I mean, how exactly did a tense but focused debate about the #MeToo movement and due process suddenly turn into a fiery clash over drag shows and strip clubs? It happens so fast, and it completely alters the entire trajectory of the conversation. Which brings us to Section 3, Culture Wars and Drag Shows, the Battle Over Boundaries. So White completely pivots the discussion to radical feminism, abruptly dropping the topic of drag shows onto the table. He directly equates what he calls drag stripper shows to traditional strip clubs. He challenges Pakman by asking, basically, why is it totally unacceptable to take minors to a regular strip club, but somehow culturally permissible to take them to drag shows? Now, Pakman counters this by pointing out that the two environments are governed by vastly different laws. He questions whether the strip club ban is actually about sexualization at all, or if it's simply about alcohol licensing. According to Justin Reloaded, though, this is the exact moment Pakman refuses to directly address the sexualization aspect just to avoid any cultural backlash. Let's take a quick step back and really look at the anatomy of this conversation, kind of like a giant puzzle. The debate starts on the #MeToo movement, but then, bam, it pivots to radical feminism. From there, the mention of drag stripper shows is met with a rhetorical pivot to the minutiae of strip club laws. And as things get, uncomfortably heated regarding these political issues, we see the most aggressive pivot of all, a sudden sharp shift to campaign finance FEC filings.
All right, Section 4, the campaign finance dispute, allegations and chicken wings.
This is where the emotional temperature of the interview goes from a simmer to a full-on boil.
Pakman abandons the cultural debate entirely to confront White with a highly personal financial accusation. And this allegation stems from a Daily Beast article. Pakman brings forward a claim that White's Federal Election Commission filings indicate he spent political campaign donations at a strip club. By introducing this, Pakman completely shifts the entire interview from a philosophical debate into a direct interrogation of White's personal integrity and his political conduct.
So, the really crucial point here is how White actually defends himself. He doesn't deny that the FEC filing exists, not at all, but he adamantly denies spending donor money on strippers. He explains that it was basically an accounting error made by his staff, and that the money was simply spent on food. He specifically points out that, hey, grown men can get chicken wings from strip clubs for donors. Pakman is visibly unpersuaded by this, straight up telling White that he is obviously lying. Now, from Justin Reloaded's perspective, Pakman didn't actually care about the legalities of buying food for donors. He simply used the allegation as an emergency ripcord, because in their view, he was losing the broader cultural debate.
Section 5, the identity politics paradox. The final climax of the interview. Okay, so the structured debate is completely broken down by now into highly personal, raw accusations. Policy and culture are totally left in the dust. But before we look at these closing fireworks, let's ground ourselves with this definition. Identity politics is an approach where people form socio-political alliances based on a specific identifying factor, like race or religion. Keep this concept in your back pocket, because in the closing minutes of this interview, both men intensely weaponize this exact concept against one another. Feeling understandably attacked over his campaign finances, White just unleashes a barrage on Pakman. I mean, listen to the intensity of this claim. You white liberals hate when black men vote Republican. White accuses Pakman of harboring this white liberal ideology that actively resents black Americans who support strong borders, oppose Ukraine funding, and prioritize an America First agenda. He essentially paints Pakman as part of a systemic order that feels entitled to minority political compliance. Pakman's counterargument is immediate, and it points out a pretty stark contradiction. He asks White, who, remember, actively denounces identity politics, why he's suddenly aggressively using it. Pakman highlights the absolute demographic mismatch of White's attack, pointing out that he actually isn't a white liberal in the traditional American sense, but rather a Hispanic Jewish immigrant from Argentina. He essentially accuses White of playing the exact same identity games he claims to totally despise. Let's see how this all builds into Justin Reloaded's concluding meta-analysis. The commentator acknowledges that, yeah, White is technically using identity politics, but argues it's completely justified. According to Justin Reloaded, Pakman's entire worldview and broadcast style relies heavily on playing a white savior role. The analysis suggests that because Pakman operates within a framework deeply rooted in identity politics, it creates this crazy paradox for his opponents. It basically becomes practically impossible for a guest like White to call out the behavior of white liberals without being forced to step right into the identity politics arena to fight back. Finally, Section 6, the state of debate. A chaotic conclusion. Following this incredibly explosive exchange about race, ideology, and identity, the communication just totally collapses. Amidst all the shouting and mutual accusations, Pakman abruptly ends the interview and literally cuts the feed, a moment Justin Reloaded characterizes as a rage quit. And that really leaves us with a critical question. Just look at the progression we just walked through together. When raw emotion, constant interruptions, and identity accusations completely replace structured, logical debate, is it actually still possible to find a common truth? Or, as Royce White alluded to earlier, are we no longer engaged in debate at all, but rather just watching the ruthless court of public opinion unfold in real time? It is a fascinating look at how we communicate today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the mechanics behind the information you see out there.